When it comes to running sound at a church, it seems like everybody just kind of volunteers to help out one day, and then they're trained by whoever knows more than them, and then everybody just kind of pieces together information until they figure it out. It's kind of a trial and error system, and the training's really not that thorough. This is because every single soundboard and mixer is extremely different from one another, and every church sets up their sound a different way. So there's really not a catch-all video that can be made to train everything that you could possibly know about running a soundboard for churches, but today we are going to cover the basics that you should know and any volunteer should be able to watch and learn quite a bit from. How's it going, everybody? My name's David. I'm the head video editor here at ReachRight, and really quick, I just want to remind you that we make content like this that help out churches just like yours all the time. So if that's the kind of content that interests you and it would help out, I would highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button so that you're notified every time we release a video. Now, I've served on and off at the tech team at my church for over a decade now, and the way that I learned how to run a soundboard was really just by learning from the person that knew before me, who knew before them, who knew before them, and it's kind of just this chain of passed on information. But there's a lot to be desired when it comes to learning everything that you need to know about a soundboard. That being said, in order to cover everything that there is to know about how to run a soundboard, how to set things up, it would be an extremely long video and I would have to cover multiple types of soundboards and models. So today we're really covering the basics. Now, in front of me, I have a small analog powered amplifier and mixer, but that's just to cover the first couple things we're gonna talk about here. Later on in the video, the majority of the video will be covered using a much more modern digital soundboard that I think a lot of you guys are currently using. And before we go any further, yes, soundboards, mixers, they really are the same thing, and so I'm gonna be using those terms interchangeably throughout the video. Now, even though we're gonna be looking at a digital board for the majority of the video today, I am starting off on this analog board because I know a lot of people are in small to medium-sized churches that could have a little bit of outdated technology, but also for the first couple things we're gonna cover, it really is going to be a lot easier to comprehend looking at an analog board. So first things first, starting from scratch, covering how does a soundboard or a mixer really know that it has different instruments to be controlling and then putting out that sound into a speaker. For this board, the speakers and instruments and microphones all plug directly into it, but we're gonna be taking a look at what I think a lot more churches use in a second here, which is a Stagebox or a snake, but we'll get there in a second. But for now, I'm plugging everything directly into this board so you can see what I'm talking about. So starting off with the easiest thing, I think it's easiest to think about the speakers that all of the sound is coming out of. This is the speakers that the congregation is hearing during worship and during the message and all that. How are those speakers getting sound pushed to them? Well, for this specific board on the back, there's actually two outputs for the speakers, and they use something called speak-on cables. One end is like this locking mechanism here, and the other end is a 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug this in so you can see. Just like that. And then this end, the 1/4 inch, would actually go to the speaker itself. And you would obviously repeat this process for the other speaker, so you have a left and a right speaker. That's one of the most basic setups I can think of. Now let's talk about the instruments and microphones that go into the soundboard that are actually going to be controlled and then put out to those speakers that we just plugged in. Let's start with a wired microphone. Most wired microphones use something called an XLR cable. So one end looks like this. It's got 3 little holes that the 3 pins of the microphone actually connect to. And so you kind of just fit them together. And then the other end is going to have those 3 pins similar to the microphone. And that's what's going to go into either your soundboard directly or into your Stagebox/snake, which we'll get to in a second. Again, for this specific soundboard, this would go into the first channel right here at the top with those 3 holes. And I'm just gonna line the pins up and boom, goes in like that. Now, most churches use Stageboxes or snakes. They don't plug directly into the board, but Stageboxes and snakes still use these XLR cables. And so how do you plug something like a guitar into the XLR input? I'll show you. Some people will still use these for their microphones as well, so they don't have to run an extremely long cable, but instruments go into something called a direct input box, or you might hear a DI box or a direct box. And with this, I can take our XLR cable that would be running either directly to the board or our Stagebox or our snake and plug it into this direct box. And then if I had my guitar, for example, whether that be an acoustic with an electric input, or my electric guitar, or a bass, or a keyboard, or something like that, and I had a 1/4 inch coming from my guitar, just like this cable, I can plug this other end in like that. And so this is the side where my guitar is coming from. It goes into this box, and then this XLR cable runs either directly to the board, my Stagebox, or my snake. And then this direct box is basically its own channel, which will help you control that specific instrument. And those speakers that we plugged in earlier, the control for the volume for them are located right here down at the bottom right. And that does seem to kind of be the primary location for most soundboards. And so I'm just gonna put these at that 0 mark, which is about in the middle, both sides. And now both of our speakers would be putting out an equal amount of volume. Now, analog boards can be extremely intimidating at first when you see how many knobs and faders and buttons there are, but the best way that I was taught is to look at this in vertical rows. It really does help simplify things because it's kind of just repeating itself for every vertical row, and all the controls will do the same thing for the corresponding instrument or microphone that is plugged into it. So for this specific board, it's nice because it's very small, simple, and compact. We only have 6 channels. Again, we're gonna get to a digital board and probably a much more relevant setup for a lot of you guys, but if you're really just starting to understand soundboards and mixers, this is a good place to start. So I just plugged the microphone in earlier on this top left portion, and this is going to be our channel. This is channel 1. So as I said earlier, right now we're not going to look at any of these knobs or faders other than what's in this one vertical row. So looking at this vertical row now, you can see that the fader is at the bottom. And putting this up will actually increase the volume of the microphone. Remember, we already have our speakers at the same amount of volume, and so they're gonna produce whatever you put into this soundboard at a specific volume, but this is how you control the individual volume of whatever you plug in. So this will control the volume of the microphone that I plugged in earlier, and we'll have it up at Unity 0. Staying down here before we go any further, we have a simple mute button, which is going to actually mute the microphone or any instrument that we plug into it. We have this little tiny LED, which is not currently lit up, but it says peak, and that's gonna let us know if the volume coming into the microphone or instrument is peaking, which means it's way too loud. And so it's kind of just an alert to let you know, hey, this needs to come down. And we also have a solo button, and every soundboard or mixer that I've seen has solo buttons for their channels. And what this does is when you press it, it's going to actually isolate that channel for the sound guy. They're gonna be able to see all of the settings specifically for that channel. If we had a lot of different microphones and instruments plugged into this mixer or board already, pressing that solo button and putting on headphones would isolate it so you would only hear that microphone or that channel and nothing else. So it's really a key or a tool to help the sound guy the most. And if we actually look at this entire board, you'll see this is kind of the monitoring system that will show you the levels of everything all together. And right now, since we have this microphone soloed, if I tap on this microphone, you can see the levels go up and down. If I unsolo it, they kind of go up and down, but we see that our solo button is not on. If we had a bunch of microphones and instruments all going at the same time, these would be actually reading appropriately. And then if we soloed it, it would only read for the microphone that we soloed. Moving up our vertical column, we have this first knob here, which is pan, and that's going to simply place the audio in a certain amount in the left speaker or the right speaker, depending on how you turn this knob. And most people will just leave it right in the middle. That means it is going to equally distribute audio to both our left and our right speakers. But if you really wanted to, maybe you have a speaker that's dying or something like that, and you want more of the volume to be in the right speaker, you would do something like that and adjust the pan knob. But most people leave it at 0, and that is recommended. Now this mixer / board has a bunch of effects and sends and returns. We're not gonna worry about that right now. So these next 2 knobs we're just gonna skip over because these knobs are much more relevant for most of the soundboards and mixers you guys will be using. So this whole section right here, all 4 of these knobs is going to be our EQ. These are equalizers, which we're going to touch on later on in the video. Right now, I'm going to leave them all in the middle. Now, at the top of our channel, we have something called the gain knob, and the easiest way to explain gain is it really is an additional way to adjust your volume, but it's going to be pretty sensitive and you want to make very small adjustments. So a good example of this would be if we have our microphone fader up all the way and you can still barely hear the person talking on the microphone or the instrument, you would want to adjust and turn your gain up. This is an input valve, okay? That's technically the term for it. Vice versa, if you had the microphone almost all the way down and they are just still blaring and clipping and not sounding good in the speakers, you could alternatively turn this gain down. And so this is kind of a way to set the window of fader volume for the channel. Most of the time you do want to leave it at 12 o'clock or 0, as most people say. And so we're gonna do that. I'm gonna reset my levels, but that is the gain knob. And again, for this specific model, we're going to ignore the line in and insert jacks at the top because that's not going to apply for a lot of your guys' board in that location. Now for the remainder of this video, we're gonna be looking at our digital soundboard / mixer, but even if you are still using an analog board, you're probably using something like a Snake or a Stagebox, and so all of this is still going to apply to you. Most churches are not plugging their microphones and all of their instruments directly into their soundboard. They're plugging them into something called a Stagebox or a Snake, as I've mentioned before. And so Stageboxes or Snakes, they all have inputs and outputs. So every single instrument and microphone gets plugged into those, and then that Stagebox or Snake is connected to the board, and the board knows what everything is once you plug it in. Not automatically, but most of the time the church already has them labeled, and if not, most digital boards, you can actually name what certain things are once you actually look at the cable and you can tell, and then it's just labeled and you'll know what it is. Those Stageboxes or Snakes also have outputs, which are typically used for monitors. And whether you're running wedges, like actual speakers that sit on the stage and produce volume that each musician uses so that they can hear exactly what they need to hear, or you're running in-ear monitors, these are coming from the Stagebox or the Snake. Now, once you have all your instruments and microphones hooked up and they're labeled correctly and you know what everything is, that is going to allow you to kind of adjust those faders at the bottom, and that's going to mix the sound to get it exactly how you want. Maybe your microphone's way too loud, and maybe a guitar is way too loud, maybe the keyboard is too quiet. You can adjust all of those settings to make it sound correct in the actual in-person service. So this is the job of a sound guy, and this is typically what running the soundboard looks like. Beyond that, you also have the monitors for the musicians themselves, whether they're in-ear monitors or they're on stage, and these are actually set up through the outputs of that Stagebox or Snake, as I mentioned before. Monitors can really be covered in something called buses, and the way that I was taught this is to think of it as an actual school bus. You're basically choosing what goes on that school bus, and then when it's ready to go, you send it on its way to the musician's ears. So I'm an electric guitarist in my worship team, and so when I have my in-ear monitors in, I really only need to hear specific instruments, and I want to hear those specific instruments at specific volumes. I'm gonna be the loudest in my ears, so I'm making sure that I'm not hitting any wrong notes, and that's typically what every musician is doing with their in-ear monitors, so they can hear exactly what they need to hear. A lot of churches will use things like click tracks as well, and so that they can stay on beat. Some churches have music directors actually saying, hey, we're going to the chorus, we're going to the bridge. All of that is important to know because you need to be able to put the correct things in the correct buses for the musicians to hear them in their monitors. And again, as far as how to set these buses up and how to do bus sends, it's really going to depend on your board. So look up your specific model if you need to know how to set that up. This is really just a basic understanding of the terms and what they do. The next thing to cover are your DCA'S, and this stands for digitally controlled amplifiers, but the easiest way to explain this and the way that I was taught is that this is groups of things that you decide on. And so typically typically what churches do is they put all of the instruments in one DCA and all of the vocals or microphones in another DCA. This allows you to kind of take a look or take a listen into what the mix sounds like. And if you just think, you know what, I think all the instruments are too loud, you can bring all of them down with a fader rather than trying to adjust every single instrument individually. They'll all be on one fader. And you can do the same with the microphones. The next thing to cover are matrices. Matrices take multiple audio sources and then actually allow you to route them to different destinations. They are very similar to the buses, but buses are typically used for things like monitors where you have a lot more control of the individual volumes for everything that is in that mix for that one specific destination. Matrices are typically used for things like your main speakers, if you have just like the building lobby speakers in your building, or if you have a separate matrix for the live stream. Those are typically what people use matrices for, and they're really good for that. Now, for the last portion of this video, I'm gonna talk about the things that confuse most volunteers or people that haven't been through any kind of audio engineer training or schooling, which are going to be the channel-specific effects. These are things like EQs and compressors and noise gates. I think most people just completely leave these alone because they don't understand them, but I'm gonna cover them really fast. And if you want a more in-depth video covering these, please let me know. But for now, I'll just kind of give you my explanation of what they are and how to use them. And hopefully that will help you get you on your way. So starting with EQ, at the beginning of this video, I kind of skipped over the knobs on the analog board of the EQ section, but really this is a way to adjust the specific frequencies of whatever audio source you have in that channel. So you have your lows, your mids, and your highs, and I'll try to do this in editing right now, but as I'm talking, I'm going to adjust all of these and you'll kind of hear the difference. So I'm going to keep talking right now. This is just an example to use, and so I'm going to be adjusting the audio and the EQ of my voice specifically so that you can hear the differences. And you don't have to just do one specific band and make that adjustment. EQs are really designed for you to adjust multiple bands and multiple frequencies to get it to sound best. This is typically how I adjust it for my voice in videos. Now, the next thing to cover would be compression or compressors. And if EQs can help you balance out all of the frequencies of an audio source, a compressor is going to help you balance out the volume of the audio source. Think about it with somebody talking. Sometimes they'll talk really quiet, especially a pastor. If they're making some kind of illustration, they can talk really quiet and serious. And then if there's a really important part, they'll talk really loud like this. And when you're listening on a live stream or on a phone or a computer or in person, whatever it may be, it's really hard to adjust for those differences. A compressor can really help level that out. The next thing to cover would be noise gates. And I literally think about this as an actual gate that allows things to come in and out. Specifically, noise. So the way that we use this is it kind of gets rid of when people are grabbing a microphone or setting the microphone down on a podium, or maybe an instrument that's really noisy when people are just kind of picking it up and putting their hands on it, and you hear kind of just the noise of the pick or whatever it is touching the strings. Those kind of things can be completely taken out with a noise gate. If you set it up correctly, anything that is below a certain amount of decibels, it will completely eliminate. And this can sound like it would just mute somebody when they don't want them to, but you can really set it on a very subtle setting and it will just take out those really quiet moments or noises from people fumbling around with a microphone. That's typically how my church uses it. And then we also have reverb. This is kind of like thinking about if your audio source was in a giant canyon, but instead of an echo that is happening where it's actually repeating the sound quieter and quieter, it's literally like you're just in a big room with a lot of resonance happening. So I'll put a lot of reverb on my voice right now. As I'm talking, you should now hear a dramatic difference, and I'll turn it off now. But reverb is a really great way, I feel like, to put on vocals when they are singing in worship, and you can just put a very, very, very small amount, and things like your live stream are gonna sound a lot more natural because you're not just hearing the direct microphone. Now it kind of sounds like you're in the room with them because every room in real life has a natural amount of reverb. Now, one last reminder, every single soundboard and mixer is very, very different, and so I would encourage you to look up specific tutorials on the model of mixer you use if you have really specific questions. But other than that, let me know any questions or comments you have down below. I would love to chat. I'd love to make a longer video or more detailed video about something specific if I know it. And then other than that, if you guys are curious about the kind of microphones you can be using with these soundboards, we have the perfect video for you right now to click on.